Okay, please join me as we open in prayer. Dear God, thank you for the opportunity to meet together, to understand where we are in this Earth's history, to understand the part that we play in the great controversy and what the movers and shakers um, are doing with regards to the great controversy, with regards to your plan of redemption. I pray that you may be with us as we discuss the opening truths that you have for us as we argue, debate, and try to reach consensus about various topics. I pray that your Holy Spirit may be with us in this endeavor. Please bless today's study. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen. Well, happy Sabbath, everyone. It's always a blessing to be able to meet with you all and study history and study the Bible and study what God is opening up. Um, as is the case with all my presentations, please feel free to participate. I'm not sure how much ground we'll be able to cover, but if I don't manage to get through what I want to, then I'll just have to cut the participation and go full steam ahead. But for the participation, feel free to message in the chat or raise your hand if you do want to say something. I'll try to keep an eye on Zoom, um, so that whoever does want to participate can. Please try not to just shout out, because it's a bit distracting. But today's study is somewhat of a continuation of my previous two studies and the themes that I had started exploring. Um, this being at the previous UK camp meeting, and there were multiple things that I wanted to start questioning or try to understand. One of them is is where we identify the test or a test in a given dispensation. We have a plethora of quotes from Ellen White that identifies the great test at the Sunday law waymark. And while she discusses the Sunday law as both a period in which events take place, she also discusses it as a point in time, a specific waymark. And it's easy to come to the conclusion or see the great test as being at that Sunday law waymark. But I tried demonstrating how since, let's say, 1989, we've developed our models in a very precise way that distinguishes between different events that take place in history at waymarks. And one of the key um, truths that we see demonstrated by the structures that we've developed is that there's this unsealing of a message that comes at what we would call Boston, and it grows until Concord, and then at Exeter is where we mark the test. So while Ellen White will talk about the Sunday law, she'll place the Sunday law as a given waymark, and then she talks about the loud cry, but she points out the great test as occurring at this Sunday law waymark, or at least that's what you can infer from her writings. Um, is that the great test takes place at this point, without going into the differences in how we view this great test. And and while I think that is true, I think what we've done and the way we've approached these structures is in a bit more fleshed out detail. instead of viewing the test at occurring at what we would call Boston, or the unsealing of a message, we come along and we add to Ellen White's models. I won't say change, and instead we recognize this repeating pattern, um, where you have a shut door at the end of a dispensation, and you have a Boston, Concord, Exeter, and instead of placing the test at this point at Boston, we would identify the test as occurring at Exeter. Now, the two concepts can be reconciled in my mind, at least, because when we think of this whole dispensation from when the message is unsealed up until the shut door, it's about a message that's going to test you. So this message that is unsealed at this point at Boston is going to develop into a point in which you are going to be tested. So I'm not here to say Ellen White is wrong. I just think that there's more to the story of this great test. Um, because as I demonstrated or articulated in my previous studies, is that you have to have all the information in front of you if you're going to be held accountable to an issue. And that's what we see taking place at the formalization. Um, and so Natalie's asked the question, they had Exeter in the Millerite time period or not? Um, so we take the symbol of Exeter from the Millerite history. So the plain answer to your question is yes, but what specifically are you inferring or
I think it was just because, Curtis, you said that we made up this Boston, Concord, Exeter, and I think we get it from the Millerite line, really, because we
so?
see when we see snow and the different stages, and we see Exeter as well.
Yeah. So if I trace back to what I said, it wasn't that we make up Boston, Concord, Exeter. What we do is we flesh out this concept of a test. That's what I'm specifically referring to. So while Ellen White will mark a test here at Boston, we would mark the test as taking place at Exeter.
I think you're talking about two different things because there is a test at Exeter, but the great test is at the Sunday Law.
So this is what I'm referring to, is how do we distinguish between the fact that we mark a test at Exeter and Ellen White marks the great test at the Sunday Law? And so if we have at the Sunday Law the great test, what is it that's being tested? Is that in line with the models that we have with tests in every dispensation? Because if we go to 2014 and we mark a test in 2014, where do we see the test in that dispensation? And I'd
We,
make the argument it's in 2018 when you have a message formalized. So it's the unsealing of that test. That's what I'm trying to articulate. But where that is going to have two streams or two classes of worshippers is only at Exeter.
we see the separation at the Sunday Law. The Exeter is where you are, everything's formalized, everything that needs to be given to you, like you said before, is given at Exeter. But it's not until you get your results at the Sunday Law, whether what side, if you're on the right side or not, that's where you see the separation of two classes of people. That's where the third angel's message has done its work completely.
So if we go to the agricultural model, what do we see taking place at a primary waymark? Because the Sunday law is a primary waymark. Yes, it's not a, I'm going to use the term secondary waymark that exists in a dispensation. It's not a small waymark in inverted commas. What do we see on the agricultural line? We recognize that that's where the seed is planted. This is going to be, I'm going to use 9/11 because that's where we placed the seed being planted. So there's a good seed and there's a bad seed being planted. And so there's two plants that are going to grow and develop. But are those seeds visible? Are they seen? No, they need time to grow. And so you have this growth time period up until you get to a point where you're able to distinguish between the two plants. And this is the point which we would mark as in whatever model you want to use, either the loud cry model or the formalization model, but you get to a point where now they're visible. Does that? I don't think we're saying two different things. I'm just trying
I,
to
I
point
think
out
I
how
think
it's a
we are.
development of a test.
I think we are with regards to Ellen White because there's a difference between the test of the formalization and the great test. Even though even like you're saying, even though it's a what's the word when it's it from Sunday law to loud cry, if you want to say it flows, it expands, it gets louder. So, but at the end of the day, the great test is kind of the same test, like you said, as formalization, but it's not until the Sunday law that you see the results of how you accepted the formalization. So
Okay,
they're synonymous, but they're not.
let's go to the line of the 144,000, because on these other lines we have small waymarks, but okay, I have it down here actually. Um, where do we see tests on the line of the 144,000? Where can we mark different tests? You, Natalie. Yeah.
Do you want to? Do you want all different
Let's
ones?
start at
So
the beginning.
you'll
Yeah.
you have a test. You'll have a test at. It depends who you're talking about because there's a
On
test
the
on.
144,000 line. Ignore all
Yeah,
the other lines.
for which people though?
For the 144,000.
Okay, so I won't use 1989 because that was a test really for the church to come out and join this movement. So 2001, again, it was the church really, even though we have to accept 9/11 within the movement as 144,000.
When we're
Um,
discussing, so I'm just going to stop there. When we're discussing the 144,000, when we're discussing a line, it has to be a story about that group of people and how God is developing that group of people. So I don't think we can ignore 1989 because that's when that group of people is raised up.
yeah, if you want to say it like that, fine with me.
Hmm. So I think you would acknowledge that the first test that is going to test God's people is at 1996. Is that fair to say?
Yeah. Yes,
And
can you
then,
hear me?
mhm. And then the second one on the line of the 144,000, not the priests.
But I was thinking though, it's the same argument we've just been having, even though it's formalization in 1996, by 2001, you show your results of that, even though
Exactly.
it's not the great test, but you know what I mean.
So you're showing your results of the test that's just passed. Is that
Yeah,
fair? Okay.
yeah,
So show results. And then the next test, but this is where the test is. It's where you're going to be tested, and then you'll show your results of that test.
yeah.
And then the next one is going to be yeah, Panium. Test results.
I'm not really happy with with that because I'm a bit wary
Okay.
about putting increase of knowledge on the 144,000 line of 2019. And also, if we're in the dispensation, I would say that for me, I would say that there's an increase of knowledge and a formalization that you haven't put on the 144,000 line there. But that's because we disagree on the Sunday law that's everyone's talking about now. So,
Whatever
yeah,
the Sunday law is, we haven't given a date to it, but there is an increase of knowledge with whatever the date is of the increase of knowledge and whatever the date is of the
yeah,
formalization.
it's just
They
that Raki and
exist.
Panion. I
Yeah.
don't agree with that.
Okay. Well, whatever they are, whatever
Yeah,
symbols, the test is going to be at the formalization.
yes,
And then this test is going to have its results at the next way mark, the Sunday law.
yeah,
Yes?
which is the great test. Yeah, whether
Sure,
you failed all the others, if you like.
sure. But there's a test that comes after this because, as with every dispensation, there's an increase of knowledge and a formalization.
Yes,
So there's a test here. Yes?
yeah, and that test is to see if you're the 144,000 if you make it.
And the results are at this point. So
Well,
this test that comes here is about a message that was opened up at what point?
where did you point then? I wasn't looking at the screen.
This Panium test.
Yeah, what's your question? Sorry.
It's about a message that opens up at what point?
It opened up in 2019, if you're talking about Panium, but because you're asking me
Okay,
when it
I'm going to
opened.
suggest that it opens up in 2001 because it's a increase of knowledge up until you get to this
But
point.
I thought you were working on dispensations.
And so this is that one dispensation on the line of the 144,000 from 2001 up until the Sunday Law. That's
Okay,
one
well, it's just like you
dispensation.
put 96 in there. I thought we were working on dispensations, but yeah, okay, I agree.
Okay,
I don't agree.
so
I don't agree with it being Panium and Raffia, but
okay,
carry on,
fine,
carry
that's
on.
okay, that's okay. But this message is unsealed in 2001. It goes through an increase of knowledge up until you get to the formalization, and you're tested on the message that's opened up in 2001. And you hand in your results at this last waymark in that dispensation. So the same should be said about the dispensation between the Sunday Law and the close of probation. That there's a message that opens up at the Sunday Law, and you're tested on that message that opens up at the Sunday Law, and you hand in your results at the close of probation.
Because you're not doing dispensations before, it seems odd that you're deciding to now do a dispensation at the Sunday Law to the close of probation.
I am doing dispensations before. So this is your first dispensation, number one, 1989 to 2001. This is your second dispensation, 2001 to the Sunday Law. And this is your third dispensation, the Sunday Law to the close of probation. And your fourth dispensation is your close of probation to the second advent.
I just thought you were doing one line from 1989 and your test from 2001 was going to end at Sunday Law. I didn't think
Yeah,
you were bringing in all the little waymarks in between.
those little waymarks are just the development of that dispensation.
We're probably saying the same thing. Carry on.
Okay.
Yeah, Natalie, he hasn't brought in little waymarks. So it's the
We brought in 1996, Alderama.
yeah, but that's the formalization. Those are the two. That's the Boston, Concord, Exeter in each dispensation.
Yeah,
Is
still
that
little waymarks.
But he's developing that pattern of Boston, Concord, Exeter, isn't he, in each dispensation?
Yeah, but
Each
it's still little waymarks. That was my point. Just carry on. It's okay.
Yeah, little waymarks. I guess that's what he's been showing from 1989, 2001, then 2001 to Sunday Law, the two little waymarks, Panium, Raffia Panium, and then you've got Sunday Law, two little waymarks, the second one being the loud cry and close of probation. Does it make sense?
Okay. That isn't the primary subject of my study. So that can be something that we explore further at another time. But let's just say it plays a part. And so maybe if we have time at the end, we can go deeper into that. But as my studies were trying to demonstrate in the last SCAM meeting, that was one of the themes. The second is that at the Sunday Law waymark, Daniel 11 verse 41, we have the image of the beast set up. So that's where it is now going to be made in the story of Daniel and King Nebuchadnezzar. That's when King Nebuchadnezzar creates that golden image. And the other element of those studies was the role of political parties in ensuring the stability of democracy. So historically, we could have seen democracy falling through coups and through takedowns of governments. But as democracies have strengthened over time, political parties have played an integral role in ensuring a democracy being stable. And I went back in history and showing how conservative parties specifically played an integral role in whether democracy flourished from the point of it being created or it crumbled. And so the key case study is Germany, and how you had unstable conservative parties, and the Weimar Republic just fell apart. And so democracy in modern history, in modern society, doesn't fall because of parties acting illegally or doing illegal activities. We have to look at how political parties behave and work with each other or against each other, and what the dynamic is between those conservative parties if we're going to understand how a democracy does fall, in inverted commas. So taking all that is what I want to kind of develop as we go further in our study. And one of the dispensations that I started trying to understand, as I still have questions about it myself, is the dispensation leading up to the Sunday law, whatever date we want to attach to that, but it's the dispensation of Panium up until the Sunday law. And typically we mark Panium as beginning into 2021, leading up until the Sunday law. So this time period over here between 2021 and whatever date that we're going to attach to the Sunday law. So why, for me, I tried understanding why it's important to understand that what was taking place externally and internally. Why is it something that we need to know? And one of the things that came to mind is that when we think of this story of a dispensation that exists first in isolation, as you can break up lines, but also as part of a story, we know that that story culminates in the upcoming waymark. So if we're going to understand this waymark, we have to understand the story that led up to that waymark. So it would be a story from 2021 up until the Sunday law. If we're going to understand the close of that dispensation, this dispensation 2021 to the Sunday law, we have to understand what story was being told in that time period. An example of that is from 1998 up until 2001, and the fall of the Twin Towers and the restraint of Islam. The story being told there is this struggle between, or the role that America had in the Middle East. You have the Afghan War from 1979 up until 1989, the USA backing the Mujahideen, resisting the King of the South, the Soviet Union, and then you have the Soviet Union collapsing, and you have a power vacuum in Afghanistan. And the Taliban rises throughout this history. The USA pulls out from Afghanistan, and extremist groups grow and flourish. And now there's this anti-Western sentiment that's growing due to the US military presence that was still in the Middle East. And then you have radical groups retaliating, and you have the 9/11 attack. So externally, that's the story that we see unfolding up until you get to the point of 9/11. Internally, we recognize that there's two elements at the increase of knowledge and the formalization. At the increase of knowledge, if I'm going to draw it out, we mark line upon line as being opened up by Alder Jeff. This is 1989, and this is 9/11. And then we have Daniel 11, verse 40 to 45, being explained in a way that it hadn't been done so before. And why this is related to the waymark that it's approaching is because if we, as God's church, had understood the implications of Daniel 11, verse 40 to 45, and the repeating pattern, we could have seen what was going to happen before it happened, i.e., that there's going to be an attack by radical Islam, or the third world would come into history, and everything that's associated with that. So this is the introduction as to why I think it's important to understand the story that leads up to a waymark, is because to understand that waymark, we have to understand both the internal development of truth as well as the external events that bring you to that waymark, if that makes sense. So one of the histories or parables that has been given to us to understand this time period between Panium and the Sunday Law is Acts 27. And in Acts 27, we'll come back to these dispensations and the relationship between the different groups and where in history they are. But one of the histories that helps us understand 2021 up till the Sunday Law is the story of Acts 27 and the winds that affect the ship of Adramyttium. And in that history, there's this rise and fall of, in application at least, there's this rise and fall of leadership, either in the Adventist Church or in relation to the USA as the sixth head and the seventh head of Bible prophecy. We associate the symbol of the dragon with the seventh head of Bible prophecy. But by the time we get to Malta, at least on the ship of Alexandria, that ship is now shipwrecked. So we have this rise of the seventh king. I'm just going to put kingdom, and the fall of the sixth up until given by Cilicia. Is that it? Given by the story of the winds of Cilicia and Pamphylia. And so when we talk about shipwreck, when we get to this rise of the seventh kingdom, it's often framed in the context of this breakdown of democracy. But as I've argued in the past, democracy looks different to what we would expect in history, where illegal laws are made, where there's a takedown of governments. And so if we want to understand what this fall of democracy or shipwreck looks like, we have to understand what that ship was meant to be doing in the first place. In the story of Alexandria, at least, this ship set sail in 1989. And that ship, or the meaning that we associate with that ship, is a good ship. Ellen White tells us that it's a good ship. But what's the definition that we give to the ship? Does anyone remember?
Defender of the people.
Mm-hmm. It's the protector or the defender of the people. So if we're going to understand what shipwreck looks like, then we should understand what the purpose of that ship was supposed to be at its origin when it set sail. I put 1989, but it's 1798. Protector or defender of the people. So I didn't hear exactly who answered that. When we say the protector or the defender of the people, what is it that was meant to protect or defend the people? What is it about this ship that meant that it's going to protect or defend the people that any other ship couldn't have done? When we say ship, it's
It was
nation.
me, Natalie.
Yeah.
I think you mean, the country of the USA was meant to be a place of freedom and liberty for God's
Mm-hmm.
people, protection.
So why that nation and not any other nation that existed before? What was different about that made it the protector of God's people, or the protector of the people, should I say?
Well,
So,
we can't say the Constitution because it
Oh.
wasn't there until the people were there. So the land itself was just free, wasn't it, of any religion or anything like that? I don't know what answer you're looking for.
well, we mark this ship as beginning in 1798. We don't mark it from the land just existing. We specifically attach it to the USA, the
So you do
country
the
of the nation
Constitution,
of the USA. Yeah,
and
and what about the Constitution?
that provided, so they say, provided the freedom and liberty for the people and protection.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Someone else had wanted to say something. I like that answer, but someone else had wanted to say something. They had unmuted. Okay, if no one had unmuted, I'm just going to develop the answer that Natalie gave. In 1863, we see the ship go off course, and either you, Natalie, or someone else can answer, why does it go off course in 1863? So it has a mission, and it has something inherent in it in 1798 that means it's going to, or it's supposed to protect or defend the people, but then it goes off course and never gets back on course in 1863. What happens in 1863 that means that it's gone off course?
I'm not sure if anyone else can answer, but I'm not sure what answer you're looking for, but because my mind keeps flipping to the church and then the country. You're looking about the national reform movement, or
Mhm.
are you looking for something else? I'm not quite sure.
So we have the NRA, not NRA, in National Reform Movement.
It was the
Seeing
association
it is,
first.
yeah, it
oh
is
yeah
NRA
oh
association.
good. my
Sorry, I
my
just wanted
mind
to ask.
immediately went to guns.
No, I had unmuted because I wanted to say something. Sorry.
Mhm. Yeah.
I wanted to ask if, like, when you're speaking about the ship, are you intending to first look at what happened to the ship before making an application, or you want to immediately go to the applications?
I'm speaking about the application. So
Okay.
at least the parable is that the ship goes off course because of
Yeah.
contrary winds
Yeah,
in
yeah, yeah.
1863.
Okay.
But
I
we've
was
established
thinking
now,
about the
yeah.
contrary winds. That's what was in my mind. So I wanted to know what answer you're looking for. That's fine.
Sure. So while I have you, those contrary winds in 1863, what have we associated them with? I'm not bringing about anything new. It's just a bit of revision.
To be honest, it's a bit hazy for me now. But I remember that
Civil War.
the ship didn't take the route that it was supposed to take because of those contrary winds. So it basically went off course, which made it go longer in the journey that it was supposed to. So it wasn't a normal journey that it was supposed to take. Meaning, when we are looking at its job function, whatever happens in 1863 takes the ship or the institution off course in a way that it's not able to do its intended work.
Wasn't it the
So
Civil War?
so while we do mark the Civil War in 1863, let's think of what purpose the Civil War served. Did it serve a righteous purpose, or did it serve a purpose that ended up taking the ship off course? I appreciate that the North didn't fulfill their part up until, God had to intervene, but the results of that was the 14th Amendment was something positive that we have in 1863. So that couldn't have been the thing that took
Oh
the
yeah,
ship off course.
I remember something.
Mhm.
So the Civil War basically brought about a lot of different things. You have the abolition of slavery, right, which was a good thing. But also with the war between the North and the South, you have this idea of church and state. The issue of church and state was brought about because both the North and the South wanted to be considered as God being on their side. So this is where you have the NRA, because with the NRA, this was a conglomeration of basically different churches in the North and not the South that came together to form basically a union that was going to bring about or make it clear within the Constitution that the USA was not a pagan nation, but rather a Christian nation. So that's a bad thing that was brought about by I don't know, yeah, if I can say a bad thing that was brought about by the Civil War, because the North also then brought church and state together, and the North was supposed to be the good side. So, yeah.
So there's a key thing, which is what I guess this study is predicated on, is that in 1863, you have a group of people or the nation coming to a place where they feel that they need to define America's identity in a specific way. And as you said, they want to distinguish it from pagan nations. And so they enshrine "In God We Trust" into the identity of America. And so they are setting this or putting their foot down and saying, this is what America is. This is who America is. And so when you come back to 1798 and we understand this development from where the nation was supposed to be and where it ended up, is we can tell this story as a story of a ship setting sail with a mandate to perform a certain work. And while imperfect at its origins, and if we compare and contrast that to the Adventist Church, where the Adventist Church, we can mark its origins in 1798, didn't have the whole development of truth, didn't understand everything that was meant for the Adventist Church at that point, but it was supposed to grow in its understanding of its role. And so it's the same with the USA. So while the Constitution was imperfect, it was meant to grow in understanding the principles that were set out in that Constitution. When Ellen White speaks about a nation rising up, she frames it as this nation rising up with principles declared in the Declaration of Independence. While that isn't an official document, in the sense of official related to the USA, she alludes to the fact that there's principles at the birth of this nation that it was meant to grow and develop from. And we see this demonstrated, or not demonstrate, we see this example used by Jesus when talking about the development of the kingdom of God. Elder Parminder broached this topic about this development of a principle when speaking about the mustard seed, the parable of the mustard seed in Christ Object Lessons. I think it's Christ Object Lessons, page 70, if I remember correctly. But that parable is speaking about a principle being implanted, the gospel, at the birth of this kingdom, God's church. And this kingdom was meant to grow and develop from this principle that was implanted at its birth. In fact, let me get the quote because I think Ellen White phrases it nicely.
When I have a
76,
question.
76, yeah.
Yeah, 76. So
I have something to add when you're ready, Curtis, to what you
go
said.
for it. While I
Yeah, I think I did a study a while back about "In God We Trust," and I don't know if it was about the stamp but basically 1863, like you're saying about the "In God We Trust" and the National Forum movement, and then in 64, I think it was stamped on the coins, was it? And then in 65, it was an act of Congress. "In God We Trust." That's all I wanted to add.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. So we see the birth of this movement to define America's identity in a specific way, beginning in 1863, and then it just grows from that, culminating in 1865, as you've described it. So I'll put two quotes in the chat. I'm going to paraphrase them. It's part of the same parable. I've just skipped a few paragraphs. But when describing the means in which God is going to develop the kingdom of heaven, it speaks about Christ implanting a principle. And that principle is truth and righteousness to counteract the error or the bad things that exist in this world. So it's this principle. And then a few paragraphs down, when speaking about the mustard seed, because this seed has a principle in it, she speaks about what this tree that was meant to grow out of the seed was meant to be. And so in the second paragraph, Christ Object Lesson 77, paragraph 2, I'll read that one in full. She says, "Yet in the mighty truths committed to Jesus's followers, the kingdom of the gospel possessed a divine life, this principle that was implanted in it. And how rapid was its growth how wide its influence. When Christ spoke this parable, there were only a few Galilean peasants to represent the new kingdom. Their poverty, the fewness of their numbers were urged over and over and over as a reason why men should not connect themselves with these simple-minded fishermen who followed Jesus. And it's this part that describes what this principle was meant to result in. But the mustard seed was to grow and spread forth its branches throughout the world. When the earthly kingdoms whose glory then filled the hearts of men should perish, then the kingdom of Christ would remain, a mighty and far-reaching power. So this mustard seed, when it reaches its full culmination of growth, its branches are meant to spread out. And in another paragraph, I just couldn't find it in these brief moments, Ellen White describes how this tree was meant to be a haven for, it was meant to provide shade, it was meant to provide shelter for the birds and etc. in the context of this mustard seed because it was so big. So now taking this to this ship of Adramyttium, this ship had a seed implanted in it at its founding through the Declaration of Independence, through its constitution, where it was supposed to grow and protect or defend the people, as did the mustard seed in providing shade or shelter to the birds or people in which its branches flourished. But instead, what we see is that it turns away from this principle in 1863. And from this point on, it's going to reach its destination, but not on the course that it was supposed to take. If it never went through the events of 1863, you wouldn't have got to a point where it's now going to go through all these rough waters, the storm of Euroclydon, and eventually leading to shipwreck. It wouldn't have gone through that path, but it does. So my point in bringing up all this is that if we want to understand what shipwreck is, we should understand what the ship was meant to do in the first place. There's a hand. Okay. Did someone raise their hand?
No, there's
Okay.
no Marcus. No.
Okay. So
Put in the
in
chat. Sorry,
Oh.
it is. Oh, go on.
yeah.
I just saying Susan put in the chat just like Nebuchadnezzar was supposed to do. And I think that imagery of the shade and shelter is because we juxtaposed Nebuchadnezzar's tree with this parable when we did it
Okay. Yeah.
in the UK. So I don't think it's mentioned in the actual Christ.
Sure. Yeah.
It's just a
Yeah.
minor point.
You're right.
Yeah, that's that. It's quite interesting that that was what Babylon was supposed to do, and Babylon being the first beast in a way. Go on, never mind. Go on.
As the king of the north.
Yes. Well, okay. I just wanted to ask, are we only looking at the one institution in the story? Okay.
Yeah.
Got you. I was now, scratching my head about what happened with Adventism, but it's okay.
Yeah. No. For now, just sticking with the institution of the USA. So when Elder Paminda did these studies and went to A.T. Jones's sermon about the gospel and the mystery of iniquity, we see these two contrasting principles or contrasting themes, the mystery of iniquity on one hand and the gospel on another. So if the gospel is a principle that exists at the birth of something, then the mystery of iniquity is the same. It's a principle, and what you see at the end is the manifestation of the said principle. And so America had two routes it could follow, because in said constitution, as we've recognized, there was a lot of ill that needed to be dealt with as time progressed. But at its birth as well, there was a lot of good that could have been built on. And instead, it chooses a path of the ill. And so it's this mystery of iniquity that I'm suggesting is also present at when the ship sets off course. And while it's supposed to be the protector of God's people, it ends up shipwrecking due to it manifesting this principle, the mystery of iniquity. So going back to these lines of shipwreck, this was the story of Adramyttium. when we talk about Cilicia and Pamphylia, Adramyttium. I'm pretty sure I didn't spell that correctly. And this is the story of Alexandria. But I'm going to skip some waymarks because of space. So it's not perfectly in line. But we get to Malta, which we mark as the Sunday law. And I can't remember if someone could remind me what waymark we associate with when that message of shipwreck arrives. I think we just call it midnight. Paul is on the boat with the sailors, and an angel arrives and tells Paul that shipwreck is coming. And as we understand, we mark midnight in 2019. So again, if we want to understand what shipwreck is, what is it in 2019 that tells us that shipwreck is coming? I'm not asking for an answer right now, but it's something to think of. In fact, I'll give a suggestion, is that in 2019, along with the preceding story that we have before with regards to how polarized the USA becomes, we see the manifestation of this mystery of iniquity slowly growing in a specific party in the USA. And in 2019, towards the tail end of 2019, we associate November 9 with the date of Raffia or midnight. But there's events that take place in the context of the impeachment of Donald Trump. And what we see during that impeachment is a completely partisan approach to what that impeachment should look like and how that impeachment transpires. And Donald Trump eventually gets impeached, but it's straight along party lines. And so the Republican Party has bought into this idea of Trumpism to the extent that they're going to defend him in that impeachment proceeding. But shipwreck hasn't arrived yet. Instead, it's a message that tells us that shipwreck is coming. And I'm suggesting now that the message that is telling us that shipwreck is coming is a message related to how the Republican Party relates to Donald Trump or Trumpism, an ideology. When we think of what I'm discussing in terms of principles or seeds that are planted, I'm framing it in the sense that this story is a story about ideologies in contention with each other. So if you have institutions, you have to have ideologies that fuel those institutions. And so the Republican Party or the Democrat Party are institutions in the way that I'm defining them. And there's ideologies that underlie those institutions. So in 2019, just saying it again, when you have the impeachment of Donald Trump, you have a message that shipwreck is coming. And when Donald Trump is impeached, there's an ideology that is demonstrated when that impeachment does take place. Sorry, I saw a hand. Okay, never mind. I made reference to a book
Francis?
yeah.
Sorry, I just want to confirm, are you marking the waymark of November 9, 2019 as the impeachment, like the external event?
For now, I don't want to tie the story to November 9, but the
Okay.
events around
Okay.
Raffia, at least,
Okay.
I'm tying to the impeachment.
All right. Is that what's connected with Ukraine, or it's different?
It is connected because that story is about the relationship between Ukraine when Trump
Okay.
is impeached. But as we'll see later, that there's this war that's going on between the King of the North and the King of the South. And there's a battle that the King of the North is facing on the Eastern and Western front. And often we dissociate the two, as if we say that the King of the North is fighting the Eastern front, the King of the South, and it's fighting the Western front in turn.
Yeah.
But I think as I'm starting to understand it further, they are interconnected, and they have to be, because this is a story about that leads to the King of the North marching into the glorious land, which is the Western Front. And the only way he can march into the Western Front or the glorious land is by overcoming the King of the South on the Eastern Front. So it's all about how this King of the North assumes world power. And so, yeah, these are interconnected stories. They're not isolated. Yeah.
Okay, thanks. I guess even also with the issue of the Eastern and Western Front, I remember we marked them both beginning way before 2019 anyway, even though they start at different times, but you have both the Eastern and Western Front that we are threading throughout that history.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Exactly. So I've made reference to a book which I found was very enlightening with regards to how democracies die. The book is called How Democracies Die. And the key points that the authors make in that book is that democracy is more than just your formal institutions or your systems of laws, the laws that a country passes, or the right to vote, and etc. There's unwritten rules that underlie a democracy for it to flourish, for it to work well. And the two, at least, that the authors bring up is this idea of mutual toleration and the second is institutional forbearance. I won't go into these deeply now. We can do so at another time. But in essence, mutual toleration is just when you have political parties in a country, are those political parties going to accept that their opponents are legitimate opponents, that they have a right to govern if they win free and fair elections? If parties don't see each other in that way, then politics just devolves into this existential struggle where one side views the other as an illegitimate threat. And it could come to the point where both sides see each other as illegitimate threats. But typically, there's a given party that doesn't play ball, if you're familiar with that expression, that doesn't play by the norms that undergird a democracy. And the second is institutional forbearance. And this is just where you have your institutions. So let's say Congress or the courts, or the powers that are invested in the executive branch. So you have political power. And if a party, when it does get power, starts to weaponize that power to marginalize opponents, it does so in a legal way. But as I said, it's marginalizing said opponent. So it's like finding loopholes, so to speak. So it's unwritten rules to say it's legal to do this, but let's not do this. Because if I do this, you're going to do this. And if you do this, then nothing's going to get done. So an example is stacking the courts. So in 2016, when Obama um, wanted to place a Supreme Court justice on the Supreme Court, you have Mitch McConnell blocking him. And while it was legal, for everything that went on was legal, there's just unwritten rules with regards to how parties do and don't behave. Because once you have these norms deteriorate, it just goes into a cycle of retaliation and tit for tat. And so nothing can end up flourishing in said democracy. And so when you have this, you have your political parties just become more and more polarized, and they become ideologically sorted into specific camps and tied to identity ideology. Before, I'm just going to put 1989. or before the 1960s, should I say, there was a lot of cross-pollination between the Democrats and the Republicans. You had some Republicans voting with Democrats, you had some Democrats voting with Republicans on issues, but as time went on, now typically you find whoever holds Congress, whoever holds the House or the Senate is just going to get their way because people vote along party lines more so than they did in the past. And that's because democracy is not functioning the way it should. Democracy should function in a way where there is compromise between parties. When you get to a point where you're not compromising anymore, I'm suggesting counterintuitively to what we've said historically about compromise is where you see democracy not working. And so we could go more into what this looks like, but another key feature is the role that parties are meant to play as gatekeepers to keep out populists and extremists. Anyway, so this book that I'm suggesting we all read details how the death of democracy in 21st century America doesn't happen overnight or because of dramatic coups. It happens incrementally because these norms or these unwritten rules that parties sign up to become eroded, and so you have an amplification of divisions, and then the system ends up being manipulated, even though it's legal to do so. So this is the story that's the story of Acts 27, at least. So we looked at this shipwreck and started the conversation of what that shipwreck looks like as we see the rise of the seventh kingdom, this dragon, that culminates in a point where that ship is now shipwrecked completely. But in that story is baked in this story of Pyrrhus. So I appreciate that I'm jumping between topics, and I hope to bring them together towards the end. But for now, at least, do we follow what I was trying to point out in regards to shipwreck and understanding what shipwreck would look like by going back to what that ship was meant to do and thinking about what a democracy falling in the 21st century would look like before we jump into the story of Pyrrhus?
Can I ask something, Curtis?
Yeah, go for it.
So you threaded the issue of the institution going off course, and yeah, you tied that to how you'll have how we are supposed to understand what shipwreck looks like at the end by looking at the beginning, basically, and understanding what it's supposed to, the ship is supposed to do, and when things went off course, and how everything else happened that happened afterwards was because the ship went off course. So when you get to midnight 2019, I want to understand how you're tying that to that thread.
So
with the Republicans.
So what the key thing that I had said at this point when it does go off course was that in 1863, the issue that throws it off course is because now you have this struggle over the identity of America. So it's an ideological warfare, if we want to put it that way. And so there's this story about either the mystery of iniquity or the gospel, the mystery of God, being planted at the beginning of this story. And one of these two principles is going to get manifested in the ship as you go along. In 1863, we see that instead of going down the route of the mystery of God, godliness, or the gospel, it goes through the path of the mystery of iniquity. I haven't tied the mystery of iniquity to this story, but let's just take it at these two principles, a good principle and a bad principle, if I can simplify it.
It's like the great controversy, really.
Yeah, exactly. And so this story is about the development of this principle, of a principle, either a good principle or a bad principle. Now it's going to be the development of a bad principle because the ship has gone off course. And this principle is tied to an ideology that is manifested in this ship. So once we get to 2019, I'm suggesting, or in fact, we can point it at 1989, because at 1989 we have the moral majority beginning its course, or in 1979 we have the moral majority beginning its course, and along the way you just see how this ideology, with regards to the identity of America, is continually being built upon. And we get to 2019, where the Republican Party has bought into a specific ideology. And I'm suggesting that that ideology is Trumpism. The way in which Trumpism believes, I'm not saying Donald Trump, I'm saying Trumpism, because that's the term that we associate that ideology with. That ideology views America in a specific way, i.e., this is what America should be, this is what America should look like, etc. And so when they side with Donald Trump in 2019 in that impeachment, they're embracing that ideology of Trumpism. And this mutual toleration that I've suggested is part of this breakdown of democracy, points to the fact that when, historically at least, when impeachments were cast, are those impeachments cast, just because of a political, what's the term that Trump likes using? Smear campaign? Or is it passed because of legitimate reasons? Whatever the case may be, I'm not trying to delve into whether it was a rightful or wrongful impeachment, but the Republican Party said, we are siding with Trumpism, with this ideology, and we're not going to play ball with the Democrats on this issue. So now it's completely polarized in how they view the system, at least. And so now we get a marker to say shipwreck is coming. I don't know if that kind of answers you.
Okay, so basically that battle for the identity of America culminates in a I don't know if I can say a specific identity that has been developing over time, or ideology, culminates in one winning over. Like there's one that wins over, and it has basically found a host, if we can say,
Yeah.
in 2019. And basically, once you get to that point, it's really difficult to undo anything else that has happened before.
Yeah. Yeah, I like the word you used, that ideology finds a host. I would suggest that that ideology found a host in 1989, because that's when the moral majority, specifically found the Republican Party as its host. But from that point on, it's just this growth of an ideology. And when we speak about this ideology, which is what we're going to speak about more, just now when we talk about Pyrrhus, is that there's not just one ideology that brings you to this point. It's a conglomeration of multiple ideologies, and that's what Trumpism is. That's what makes it, in inverted commas, fascinating, is that if you look into what the principles of Trumpism is, there's brands of politics from everywhere. We will let's get into that actually.
Yeah.
Let's get into that.
All right. I guess what I just wanted to get clear on was the connection.
Curtis, sorry, could you go back to that line for a moment?
This one?
Yeah, that one there. I just want to confirm that I understand what we are saying.
Let's say what I'm saying. I don't want to speak for anyone.
We being me and you.
Okay. Sure. Okay, let's do that.
That were it not for the contrary winds, the ship would not have gone off course. And if it had not gone off course, it would not have been shipwrecked.
Mhm.
So there's a cause to effect relationship between the contrary winds and the eventual shipwreck of the ship.
Yeah.
Okay. And then Paul, just before it happens, is told it's going to happen.
Yeah.
Okay.
Actually, sorry, I just wanted to say something. There's a verse that I read in Acts 27, I think around verse 10, where just after they left Cnidus and then eventually, I think Crete and Salmon or something, he actually tells the sailors that, you know, we are going to get into shipwreck and this is something that's going to affect our lives and, you know, and everything. So before we even get to midnight, there's Paul actually
Some
says
warning
something.
signs.
Yeah,
Yeah, I think Paul says like we shouldn't travel because it's winter or something, and so it's not a good time to travel. Typically they wouldn't have traveled. I guess
yeah,
that's why they lodge at the island before. I can't remember the name of the island, but that's why they lodge there for a while, and
yeah,
they decide to go. Yeah.
yeah.
So
But they
so
didn't listen.
along there's warning signs throughout this whole story that shipwreck is coming. So this message that comes at 2019 or midnight in the parable isn't like something that is coming out of nowhere. There's been warning signs before that point. It's just this angel is now telling you, okay, brace yourself because shipwreck is around the corner. And then the next waymark tells us how far that shipwreck is or the time till that shipwreck. But yeah. So as I alluded to, in the story of Acts 27, we have baked in this waymark of 273. And we use, or Elder Tess used that interesting number to arrive at the history of Daniel 8 and the story of Pyrrhus. And this is in between the years of 275, 27, is it 275? Yeah, 275 and the Battle of Beneventum. And 272. And in between that's history where Pyrrhus loses to Rome and where Pyrrhus dies eventually. We have this waymark of 273. Now, I've been interested in this waymark of 273 for a long time, as I'm sure many people have been. Sorry, did someone say something? Okay. So yeah, I've been interested in like what does this mean? What does this envoy represent? What's the application? And multiple other questions that I've had. And so I'm going to suggest what I think it means, and we can discuss that. But first, before doing that, I want to understand the symbols of this. So Pyrrhus has just lost. The king of the north, Rome, has just defeated Pyrrhus, and now Egypt is going to send ambassadors to Rome, the winner of that battle. And in 272, Rome is going to send a delegation of ambassadors back to Egypt, where we get this symbol of Quintus, what's it? Quintus Fabius Maximus Gurgis as the head of that delegation. Now, understanding this name, I think, should be done in the context of this story that's being told. So while we can understand the symbols of the breakdown of this name, Quintus Fabius Maximus Gurgis, in the context of Quintus Fabius Maximus Gurgis, I think that alongside that, we have to understand this symbol or this name in the context of the story it's being told, i.e., this exchange of ambassadors. So just as a quick recap, who's the king of the north in this story? Anyone? In the story of Pyrrhus and Rome and all the other parties and Egypt, who's the king of the north?
So in this history, we have Rome basically still rising. And I'm not sure
yeah.
where exactly we mark
Okay, who's the
Rome
king of
as
the
the king of
south?
the.
Who's the king of the south?
That's an easy one.
Is it?
Because-
No,
Is
not
it?
in
Is it
this
not?
story.
King
In
of the
this
South.
In
story.
this story.
Oh, right. See, it's a difficult one. There's, I don't know.
Anyone wanna give a helping hand?
I can try.
Is it?
Mhm.
Does it not
Try,
also
I can
depend on
say.
the thread that you're
In the story that Elder Tess told, the story of
okay? So
Pyrrhus is
then
about
that's
who.
Pyrrhus. So then that's
Mhm.
Pyrrhus then.
Um, Curtis,
Yeah.
I understand Elder just told it. Well, she's the one who told it. But yeah, in that story, Pyrrhus has to be the king of the south because Pyrrhus is the one that's engaged in a war with Rome.
Mhm.
And at least at the very simplest level, it was a fight between the northern part of Italy with the southern part of Italy.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And Pyrrhus was leading the southern armies.
Armies. Mhm.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
Rome and Pyrrhus are the kings of the north and south there.
So we have Rome, the king of the north, Pyrrhus, the king of the south. So I'm glad Charity said what she said about Egypt, because typically we associate Egypt with the king of the south, but now Egypt is taken up. I mean, the symbol of the king of the south is taken up by Pyrrhus. So who does that leave Egypt as being?
The world. Well, no, I don't know. I
Yeah,
don't know.
we can say the world. What else do we, what's other symbol do we associate with the world?
Greece.
Greece. So let's say the world.
See,
I'll put
sorry,
that.
I'm a bit confused.
Mhm.
I know, like, you know what? In this history, there's a different thread of the story. So anyway, it's okay. Continue.
Sure.
The dragon.
The dragon. I like that. Let's go with the dragon. I like the dragon. They're all interchangeable. The reason why I like the dragon is because it leads well into what I'm going to imply next. But anyway, so we have the king of the north as Rome, king of the south as Pyrrhus, and the dragon as Egypt in this story. So in 273, when Egypt sends its ambassadors to Rome first, so who is initiating this ambassadorial exchange? It's Egypt that's sending its ambassadors to Rome. And then Egypt reciprocates. No, sorry, Rome reciprocates by sending ambassadors to Egypt. Symbolically, we can infer that Egypt is the dragon, symbolically. And I think more than just the fact that it's the only symbol that's left, we can understand the context in which this war was taking place. So Egypt at that time was part of Ptolemy's empire, and the Ptolemaic Empire at that time, after the breakup of Alexander's kingdom, was pretty much one of, if not the dominant force in the region. And so Ptolemy wants alliances because Ptolemy is at war with the Seleucids. So when Egypt sees Rome doing well, Egypt wants allies to help it in its fight against the Seleucids. And so Egypt stretches out to Rome because they want a good ally in this fight with the Seleucids, and Egypt establishes this connection. So in this story, Egypt is, let's say, a superpower at this time, a global superpower, and it's looking for alliances in its desire, or it's an aspiring superpower. And it's, yeah, that let me phrase it that way, an aspiring superpower, and it's looking for alliances to be the sole superpower, the Seleucids being its main enemy at that time. So this alliance, another term for this alliance, is a union between these two parties, and it's finalized in 272. There's another union that we speak of that the king of the north and the dragon are involved in, or where we see this taking place um, in a different way, in a different story. I'll post the quote in the chat, but in fact, let me ask, where do we see a similar story taking place? So this is a story about an alliance or a union between parties. Where else do we see this articulated, or who else articulates something similar as being the case?
Can you repeat your question, Curtis?
So I've detailed the history of an alliance being made, a union being made between the king of the north and Egypt, the dragon. But this is telling the story of two parties. Where do we see similar interactions taking place, or who speaks about something similar in that way? And I've put the answer in the chat. It's in detailing this threefold union. It's spoken about in Revelation as well, but Ellen White articulates it pretty precisely of this threefold union. She says, when Protestantism shall stretch forth her hand across the gulf to grasp the hand of the Roman power, when Protestantism shall reach over the abyss to clasp hands with spiritualism, and under this influence of this threefold union, the country shall repudiate the principles of its constitution, etc., etc., etc. My question is, from past studies and from what you understand, what does this alliance in this context, this threefold union look like? So we're in modern day history and we have three parties, the dragon, the beast, and the false prophet. These are the symbols we're given, which represent typically we've said the UN, but we know that's not entirely correct. Instead, we can put nations. The famous one that we like to associate with it is the USA. The beast as the papacy,
Where
and the false prophet. Yeah, Natalie, you can speak.
This is not my thinking. Somebody else's. I won't mention who it is yet. When you put the UN, and then because we know Elder Tess said Dragon UN or Egypt's UN when she did this study. When you put the UN and you put nations, all great in the USA, would you please be really whatever comes to your mind? Would you put the NATO there?
I don't know if I don't know. Yeah, that's my answer to you for now. I don't know.
Is Natalie saying that NATO is part of the dragon?
Natalie's not saying anything. Natalie's got a thought that from somebody else.
On behalf of a friend saying that NATO is part of the dragon.
I'm not. I said would. I've got a thought in my mind from somebody else, and I'm asking the opinion of Curtis, and I said to him just whatever comes to his mind. I think he gave the answer. He's not prepared to say it
Yeah.
there, which is fine. But I was wondering, is there anything that comes to mind why we couldn't put NATO there? I mean, I've got my thoughts why we couldn't. Have you? Because it might help me.
I plead the fifth. I don't know.
What did you say then?
I need to think about it more
Okay,
in terms of what precisely this dragon represents. What I do understand it does represent is a nation, is state powers. And so when we associate the UN, what we're saying is the world. What we're saying is nation states.
Yeah.
And one of them is the USA. And what we expect when that state or that entity is now the seventh kingdom of Bible prophecy is the USA
Yeah.
being the sole global superpower. So that's
Yeah,
how I understand it.
that's why for me, I can't fit NATO there because of what you've just said there, and also because it's not really, even though it's nations in NATO, it's not a state, is it?
Um,
I'll
I need
leave
to
it there.
think about it more.
Yeah.
Sure. Okay. So now we have these three entities. I'm going to just use the USA as the symbol of the dragon, if everyone's comfortable with that. We have the USA as a state, being the dragon, the beast being the papacy, and the false prophet being apostate Protestantism. Ellen White phrases it or frames it in a different way. She uses different symbols for these entities. She uses spiritualism. How much time do I have left?
You've got about 10 minutes till 12.
That is not ideal.
You go on though, don't they, Deb? They're allowed.
Yeah, well, I was going to say we have to sort of. Well, if he can always do a part 2 or do think it another time, perhaps for Investors or something.
Okay.
I don't know
So-
what time do you want to finish?
Yeah, I won't be able to finish today, so I'll have to pick it up at another time.
Okay.
Sorry, Curtis, before you continue.
Mhm.
So when you're looking at these three symbols, the dragon, the beast, and false prophet, if I'm not mistaken, correct me if I'm wrong, we have the religious manifestation of the threefold union, and then you have the civil, if we can say, manifestation. So I just wanted to understand in terms of the three that you put there, when you're talking about apostate Protestantism, is that a religious or civil?
What makes it apostate? When we say apostate Protestantism,
Basically, of course, it wasn't doing
its job.
and
So
it became
it's
apostate.
yeah. So when we speak about the papacy, at what point did the papacy become the papacy? I'm going to suggest it's in 538. Before that, you had a church, and then in 538 you have that church being granted civil power, or not be although it was decreed before that, you see in 538 the point at which now it has civil power. So I think when we talk about Catholicism, that's different to the papacy.
Yes,
They're
yes, that one I
related,
understand.
but so I'm suggesting it's the same thing when we talk about the false prophet, that Protestantism is now what you've described as an ideology, whereas
Religious?
I want to say ideology. It is religious, but broadly speaking, I want to say ideology. The reason why I'm saying that is because I want to describe the dragon, and I want to use a term that encompasses all three. And sure, spiritualism is religion, but when we now understand it today, in what the manifestation of spiritualism is today, it's easier to see it as an ideology. So I'm being deliberate in framing it as an ideology. You'll see why. So
Okay,
I'm not
I was just
disagreeing that it's religious.
no, I'm not. I'm just trying to understand how you are putting it, because in my mind I thought, okay, maybe he's doing the religious manifestation, and then you have the civil, I mean, religious, manifestation. So I was just trying to understand apostate Protestantism and how we see that in a civil sense. You know, like what you have with the papacy. With the papacy, it's easy because we know it's a state, and their religion is Catholicism. So now I was trying to understand apostate Protestantism and the civil aspect of it.
I would suggest that it's the same as the papacy. So the Catholicism, or in using the terminology of Revelation, the woman found its beast in pagan Rome. It found its civil entity that's going to do its work. And so I would suggest that we should expect the same of Protestantism. It finds its vehicle, as we spoke about before, that is a political entity that it's going to use going forward. And so I'm specifically not saying church-state union. It is, but I want us to think about what that means when we say church-state union and etc. But yeah,
Okay,
so
go ahead.
gotcha. So as Charity pointed out, there's this symbol, dragon, beast, false prophet, and this symbol can be understood in its civil aspect or in its ideological aspect. And that ideological aspect is spiritualism, Catholicism, Protestantism. And what we've understood by this threefold union, where we have these entities that are in nope. We have these entities that are in an alliance. We understand that all three have specific ideologies associated with them. Now, when we expect a threefold union, this is me referring back to two studies, specifically done by Aldertes and Alpaminda. The key points that were brought about by those studies is that there's something that brings them together, and it's not them actively like going into secret alliances, actively working together. It's not them actively collaborating on issues to achieve a new world order or etc. It's that these three entities have ideologies associated with them that bring them to the same point, or that bring them to the place where they perceive the world through a specific lens, i.e., if we can put it, patriarchy. So where spiritualism has a specific worldview, the result of said worldview is a patriarchal society. Catholicism has a specific worldview that brings you to the point where you have a patriarchal society, and Protestantism does too, at least in today's setting. So all three align. So that's what this union is. It's a union that's undergirded by having a shared culture, an underlying ethos that they have. Is that clear of how we understand what this alliance is when we talk about the threefold union? Does anyone have any questions about that? Speak now or forever hold your peace. Yes? Someone just acknowledge that that makes sense.
Yeah, for me, it becomes more Catholic,
Yes.
but I'll say no more.
Okay. So not so in any case, this union is about a shared ideology between three separate entities, and how even though they are separate entities who have different agendas, who have different purposes, who have different goals, they come into union because of the ideology. The reason why I'm emphasizing this and hammering this home is because we already accept and acknowledge this. So now, when we go back to this alliance that's being formed between Egypt, the dragon, and the king of the north, if whoever you want to associate the king of the north with in that story, either the USA as apostate Protestantism or the papacy, whoever you want to use as the king of the north in that, as that symbol in this story, then what I want to demonstrate is that this alliance that's being fostered at 273, that's being initiated, is an ideological alliance. It's not a literal alliance. It's just a story about this threefold union and how it develops. And we only see two parties in this story, but it's really a story about this growth of this threefold union and this ideological alliance. When Egypt sent its ambassadors to Rome in that time period, typically nations would exchange ambassadors in what was called a the term is for leaving my mind. It was a formal amictia, I think. And so this formal amictia, I may be pronouncing that wrong, essentially needed this reciprocal recognition between the two entities where they had a diplomatic exchange. And if this exchange didn't happen, then the alliance or the union between the two nations or the two parties wouldn't be formalized, it wouldn't be ratified. And so it symbolized an equality in the union between the nations at that time. So it wasn't enough for Egypt just to send ambassadors to Rome. It needed that delegation from Rome to be sent to Egypt for that union to be solidified. So if we have Egypt as the UN, the USA, in that story, and we have Rome as the king of the north in that story, I want us to consider what Egypt being spiritualism means. And
Just before you move on,
mhm,
and you mentioned the diplomatic, or you use that word, you know, when the 273 Elder Test says that we see a diplomatic relationship between Egypt and Rome. She also says that we see we see the world sees Rome in the forefront. She's talking about literally in our time. That's what the diplomatic relationship is with Rome and the USA. How do we explain that?
my explanation, not Elder Tess's, not anyone else's, I'm suggesting that to understand this diplomatic exchange, we have to understand the threefold union, because that's what the story is about. In application, it's the development of this threefold union. So I didn't fully understand your question, but I'm just emphasizing what I'm trying to demonstrate is that this alliance is an ideological alliance in application. Then it was literally an alliance between um, the Romans and Egypt, but in application, we should view it as an ideological alliance and not literal, shaking of hands and uh, unions between these entities. Does that kind of speak to what you were asking?
It doesn't answer my question, but it's fine. It's just another
Okay.
way to look at it. Thank you.
So in thinking about this exchange, the party that I want to focus on is Egypt. So I have run out of time, and so I can either, in fact, I'm gonna close there because there's quite a fair bit more that I'd like to go through. And so we can pick that up later. But just to recap of what I've been going through. I gave a brief summary of what I had discussed at the previous camp meeting. And what I had started bringing about is understanding the shipwreck of the ship of Alexandria. And to understand that shipwreck, it was my suggestion that we have to go back to when that ship set sail. And from the point at which that ship sets sail, we see a specific principle implanted in the Constitution that was meant to grow and develop. And we see the parallel being the story of Nebuchadnezzar, and how this tree grows and is meant to provide shade and shelter. So that's what the ship of Alexandria was meant to be, a protector or defender of the people as this principle grows and develops. But instead, we have contrary winds in 1863, and there's a specific ideology, a specific way in which America's identity begins to get defined, that sets that ship off sail. And then from that point up until it eventually is shipwrecked, you just have warning sign after warning sign that this ship is going to be shipwrecked. And the story of that shipwreck is tied to this definition of America's identity, an ideology that gets manifested or that grows from waymark to waymark. And then from that point, I went into a discussion, or should I say, a
Clinton.
perspective. Yep.
Oh, sorry. Can I have a question about that? You know, when you
Yeah.
said to be a shelter and to provide, how do you see that looking? And we haven't got time to go into it now because I don't know whether, you know, we say it's gone off course, but I'm not even sure what providing and sheltering would have looked like. Are we talking spiritually? Are we talking economically? Are we talking both to the world? What was America meant to be? Or is that something?
Elder Emma,
Yes.
why has he got more time when others are given more time?
I'm not in charge of the time today, but I mean, he can take more time if he wants to. If everyone's happy to go a bit longer, but I don't know how long you need. How long do you think you need, Curtis?
Um,
Half
I
past?
could,
I don't know.
yeah, 1:30 if that's okay.
I don't mind if everyone else doesn't mind. So it's a
Thank you.
democratic decision. Oh, go on.
Debbie, you're in charge.
Yeah, I
say
was going
ye?
to say, well, I'd rather that you wrapped it up at 12 myself, but I mean, it's up to you at the end of the day if you want to go on.
Is everybody
Oh.
else okay with that?
I
Nobody's
just
speaking.
think
Maybe
we
instead
can't.
of rushing, you can just come back and do,
Oh,
you
that's
know,
what
do
I
it
thought.
again.
I think
Yeah,
Because
if
we
you,
might
if
have
you
questions or
Yeah.
contributions.
and it's just going to keep
Yeah.
going on and on. We've got to sort of wrap it up because I was
yeah,
going to say, so I think the next time he does it, at least he's got more time to ask all the questions as well as developing it. So
We
that's
have
what
to
I
keep
think.
we have to keep those rules for everyone then, not just no.
Yeah, I think
Yeah,
last
do
week,
you want-
when you brought
I-
up last week, that was a bit.
at 12.
I
What was that?
I also second the, like a second part,
Yes,
because
I do.
I
I do.
kind of feel like it would be rushed and
Yes,
we wouldn't
yeah.
properly benefit.
Yeah, and some of
So,
us have got questions and things
yeah.
will be stopping you along the way. So
Yeah.
up to our
Okay.
part, it won't happen.
Okay. So
Sure.
Curtis, if you can kindly wrap this up, and
Okay.
we'll do a second part to that. Okay.
Okay, so just continuing on with the summary, is that this is a story of the manifestation of an ideology in America. And I'm tying that specifically to 1863. And if we understand that, then it helps us, as I'm suggesting, when we do get to the Sunday Law Waymark, determine what that is, what it is that is the marker or points us to the Sunday Law Waymark. And then I started discussing this exchange of ambassadors between Egypt and Rome and Egypt. And I associated that with the Threefold Union and what we already understand that Threefold Union to look like. We understand that that Threefold Union looks like the coming together of three ideologies, three different entities with three different agendas, but they reach the same point in terms of how society should be organized, what society should look like, what the nation or the world should look like, and that's a patriarchal society. They may not explicitly say so, but their underlying ethos brings you to that point. And so what I wanted to start going into was this exchange in 273. We line it up with, if we put that as Panium, and we put that as the Sunday Law Waymark, 273, we place at the increase of knowledge in that history. And so I've already made suggestions of what I think the external events are of that history. And it's my intention to understand how those external events point to this alliance starting to being formed. It's not really the start, but at a waymark level, it's where we see those ambassadors being from Egypt being sent to Rome, remembering that it's the ambassadors from Egypt that first go to Rome, not the other way around. And then that alliance is formalized at 272. So I guess before we next meet, one of the questions we can think about is when we say spiritualism attached to the dragon, what does that mean? What is spiritualism based in the Bible? And how do we get from spiritualism as understood in the context of the state of the dead to what we see the dragon as representing today? What is it that the dragon represents in its ideology? And how do we make that connection between the state of the dead, spiritualism, and whatever answer we're going to put with regards to spiritualism today? So yeah, let's close there, and we'll pick this up at another time. Let's close with a word of prayer. To answer Natalie's question, yes, in the chat.
Okay, I didn't see that. I thought you put it in the middle of Panium and Sunday Law. Can you send me a picture where she did that? Thank you.
Sure. Okay. Dear God, thank you for the opportunity to go through today's study. I pray and ask that we may continue in our understanding of history, continue in our understanding of where we are. I pray that you may be with us through the rest of the Sabbath. Please guide and bless us. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen.